8 minutes after 10 p.m. Central Africa time. I told you that this hour we would be focusing on two books, Unbound and the other being Letters to Her. And the idea really is to look at how we can strengthen relationships, particularly in contexts of loss. Now, the book Unbound Heart explores how past heartbreak, abandonment, rejection, and unmet needs shape the way we love as adults. Dr. Nicholas Neaves argues that many people are not afraid to love and are not afraid of love itself, but they're more afraid of being unsafe in love. And then the book Letters to Her by Dr. Nicholas Neaves is written as a series of reflective letters. This book speaks directly to her, the woman who has overextended herself emotionally. She stayed too long, she loved too hard, or she doubted her own worth. Dr. Nicholas Neaves is a homeopath and narrative therapist with over 25 years experience in this particular sphere and industry. And he joins us this evening to unpack the reality of relationships and how we can strengthen these. I think even with yourself, because Letters to Her strikes me as that kind of book, one that will encourage you to look at self and begin to appreciate who you are. Doctor, before I get ahead of myself, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to African Diaries.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Let's start off with just giving an overview, of course, in your own words, of the two books. I want to start with Letters to Her. In your context, how do you describe this book to somebody who is asking?
Well, I would say it's certainly an invitation into a deeper connection and intimacy between two people. Her, in inverted commas, would be the other. And so it's about the reflection of self and the self-awareness of our own internal dynamic and how that impacts the other. I think there's far too many of us running around a little unconscious as to how we actually impact another person, and we don't slow ourselves down enough to actually understand what the relationship's truly about and what an opportunity, privilege, and gift it is to come into a relationship with somebody else. I think all too often we go into the relationship and we unfortunately play out a lot of roles that are unresolved from our earlier years in life.
Yeah.
And so we often objectify the other person, and sadly we ultimately can also hurt them due to our own sort of selfish, uncovered areas of our own lives. And so the letters are an awakening. They are a dance between two people and a polarity between the sexes also. And I think the key word there is definitely invitation. I think it's such a beautiful framework to work from, is I offer you an invitation to join me in something deeper versus you have to join me, or why didn't you join me? But it's, hey, I'm over here. Would you like to join me? Come have a cup of tea. This is where I'm at. Where are you? Let's have a conversation, And it was a 2-year journey and over 86 letters, some long, some short. But it's certainly also highlighting a man's perspective in and around a lot of his unconscious parts also, and quite a bit to do with the patriarchy and how a man often tries to control or manipulate in order to get some of his needs met, but in particular his sexual needs, right? And it's about bringing that to the awareness and into the light so that we can have more free and loving experiences with each other, where we have a good beginning and a great middle and a good ending if it does end with respect and love.
Doctor, quite a bit said there. And as you are explaining, I'm just imagining inviting someone, but also having a look-see at myself. How do we navigate that terrain where I'm inviting you to be in my environment, but Shayla's still able to see Shayla and what Shayla's capable of doing within the frame of this relationship?
Thank you for that invitation to share more, right? And so this is the dance now between you and I, and it can go into really wonderful places, because I can already hear that you have an awareness of some of these dynamics, just the way you framed that, and you shared having a knowing and awareness of yourself, and then going into a dynamic with someone else, right? And so you basically said the first major part there in healthy relationships, and that is like know thyself as best you can. Do the work, do the coaching, get therapy, read the books, etc. Know how you operate. What is your operating blueprint? If you had to hand someone an operating manual on how to operate you, right? Like, when you purchase a car, you get that big book and it tells you how everything works, or even just a vacuum cleaner, right? Like how it works, where's the on button, off button, etc. I think we need to be a lot more aware of not only how we operate, but also our own demons. In other words, when it gets hot in the kitchen, how do I operate? What are my defense mechanisms? How do I cope? How do I fight? Right? And understanding that about yourself certainly pre-paves an awareness in a relationship that you can both know and therefore both have an action plan for when it starts to come up. Most ruptures in a relationship happen where you'll find one or both partners are really unaware of themselves. And so they get triggered. And once that happens, they lose a sense of themselves and they go back into old primitive sort of ways of defending and gaining control again in the dynamic. And that's often where people get really, really hurt. So self-awareness is certainly the first step. And that means turning your eyes inwards and actually having a look and seeing what it is that's going on for you. And a lot of the letters in the book were really highlighting, particularly for men, the ability to be able to go inside and actually become emotionally aware of what is happening in the internal landscape. In other words, what is the feeling? What is the experience inside? Not outside, but inside. And so making him a little more emotionally available to himself and therefore aware. And so when his partner brings her concerns or issues, he has the awareness of it now. And so he can engage. So if he knows what sadness is in himself, he can pick that up and see and tune into that with his partner's sadness and therefore have empathy for it. And the same for anger or any other negative emotion, fear, irritation. He can pick that up in her now too, because he's gained that self-awareness first.
Dr. Neaves, knowledge isn't always power. It's applied knowledge that is power. How do we shift from knowing thyself to being able to take that knowledge and apply it in context?
So context would be two human beings engaging with each other, right? So a real-time, lived-out relationship. Doesn't have to be romantic. A lot of our clients, what we do is we send them out on a vulnerability challenge, and that is to go and find 2 or 3 people that they know that they can trust and go and be vulnerable with. And so it could be Mary from the old school that they knew. It could be Peter from the library or whatever. It doesn't have to be that romantic interest. And it's about having regular contact with that person, but it's the ability to be able to engage with that knowledge now that you've gained, which is to be able to, in any given moment, share your lived experience as truthfully as you can, and therefore as vulnerably as you can with the other person, and seeing that that lands in the other. And so Peter or Mary that you've selected to have this exercise with, they're really good at listening, and they really hear you, and they really take in what you're sharing vulnerably, and they might even reflect that back to you. And so it's in that dynamic that your brain and your nervous system learns to trust other human beings. You know that there is someone out there that I can share vulnerably with. And guess what? They didn't react. They didn't get defensive. We're not in a big rupture. And guess what? They're even there tomorrow asking me how I am. I didn't scare them away. My vulnerability, my softer parts aren't scary. Somebody can contain them. Somebody made it safe for me. And so it's choosing those people to practice this with. And then ultimately, yes, in a romantic dynamic, it becomes a lot easier. But it's in real-time relationships that we learn the most.
And Dr. Neaves, when it comes to decluttering self, right, I do think that one of the key factors is really being able to deal with yourself. And I think that you even alluded to that in the first hour. If you make him more emotionally available to himself, if you make her more aware of what she struggles with, then she can have the grace for the next person. What kind of journey need one take to regulate that? Because I think we are in such a fast-paced world. Everything is moving at 120 k's an hour. There's no time to stop and think and breathe. How do we navigate that?
Yeah. Well, a pause button would be great, and some kind of cosmic remote that can really just help us go in slow motion, right? Because the human brain tracks things very quickly. Just sitting here right now, my brain every second is scanning my environment here for safety 4 times per second. If I've had trauma or I'm in any kind of hypervigilance, it'll be up to 8 or 10 times per second that my brain is processing my environment to be safe. And that would include also then being with another human being. So I would be picking up body language, micro expressions, tone, words, all of that within seconds when I'm engaging with somebody else, right? And so I immediately respond to those from a place of either openness or fear. And the fear would then make me develop my own thoughts, feelings, and opinions about what you're saying, because I can hear in your tone and see in your body language all those little micro expressions that you are a threat and that you're actually coming at me and you're attacking me. And so when we do our couples work, we actually literally practice slow motion conversations where we just take one sentence and we unpack the dynamic between the two people and how they are relating to the words and the tone of that sentence, that they can practice navigating through that. It's the only way. The environment, life, as you said, is so fast-paced that we have to learn in relationship to not just bypass each other. We sadly have become very selfish, and so we project a lot of our lives onto other people, expecting them to be that way very quickly and very early on, or be like that podcast, or why can't you be like that guy on that show or YouTube video or whatever it is. And so we're comparing tremendously. We're saturated with comparison and images. And so we have to become present. We have to honor the moment and really just slow it down. So a lot of our couples do intimacy exercises where they practice this weekly, slowing down, being present, really hearing each other. And, the key here that you want to look for is understanding that, let's say you were sad, like in my previous example, you need to know that your sadness has somewhere to land, right? If you have no way of getting that out and letting someone witness that with you, it stays inside. And what about anger? What about fear? What about regret? What about disappointment? If you don't have a place where you can share that with another person, where it genuinely lands and you can see in their tone, their body language, their micro expressions that they get it, that they feel the disappointment with you, what happens is those unexpressed emotions become the internal clutter. And that's where you get jam-packed with a whole bunch of unprocessed emotions. Where does that go? Where does all that energy go? And so we develop disease. And let's not even go there, right? I mean, there's so many chronic illnesses, so many cancers, unexpressed energy, unexpressed feelings and emotions, because we don't often have safe spaces where people can, land their feelings. Now we've got the whole AI thing. And of course, that's been an excellent mirror and validation for a lot of people. And hopefully that'll help people just get a bit more self-awareness and feel a little bit more secure about themselves. But it's not going to give them that oxytocin feeling of bonding with another person, where that person has genuinely actually felt that feeling with them. That's what creates bonding, and it's what also then ultimately creates trust. But sadly, it seems like a lot of us are bonding a lot more with our technology and becoming cyborgs than with actual other people.
Doc, I mean, you said it. You said it spot on. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking the reality of how your day to day looks like. You wake up in the morning, phone in hand. No, you're navigating through the day, phone in hand. You're reaching people using that very phone. And then when people are in front of you, they're probably in a distraction to what it is you're trying to achieve on the phone. And that's scary. We're going to take a quick breather. When we get back, we continue this conversation. On the line with us is Dr. Nicholas Neaves, who is a homeopath and a narrative therapist, but also the author of Unbound Heart and Letters to Her. What we are currently discussing is Letters to Her and just getting into the themes and the concepts that are covered in that book. If you want to share your questions, your thoughts, your views, find us on WhatsApp +278 3288 6684. 6 minutes before the second hour of the show, we are still in conversation with Dr. Nicholas Neaves, and we're looking at his book, Letters to Her. And this is an invitation. Oh, I love that statement. It's an invitation for you to join this person on this experience of a relationship, but also a moment to self-reflect. Doctor, one of the themes that you cover in the book is shrinking yourself to be loved. How do you contextualize it in this book?
So, when we are rather young, we are dependent, and we have to allow another human being, a primary caregiver, to literally keep us alive, right? And so if that love in our earliest few months, years, is not a consistent or safe or trustable experience, that little child learns very quickly to adapt and learns to manipulate itself into receiving the care that it needs, ultimately. And so this is the process in the beginning of self-abandonment, where I will abandon my needs and keep quiet and play the part, because when I do that, mommy and daddy smile and they seem happy with me when I don't do this or I don't do that. And so I become what they need me to become. So in essence, I don't become loud, I don't expand, I don't amplify myself, I shrink myself, right? I keep myself small as to not rock the boat or upset anyone or trigger anybody into a negative reaction towards myself, because that's extremely scary as a child. And so these are early defensive patterns that we learn growing up to keep ourselves safe and loved and get the nourishment that we need. And so a lot of us still, when we go into relationships when we're adults, will have that same tendency to quite early on pick up what the other person is about and what it is that they need. And so what we're doing is we're externalizing our sense of self. In other words, when that person is okay because of how I'm behaving, when they're okay, then I can be okay, right? And so this is the beginning of codependence, where as long as you're okay, right, then I can be okay. The minute you're not okay, I have to change and shrink myself and be a chameleon in order to get you back to being okay again, so that I can be okay. Because when you're not okay, I pick up within you that there's a withdrawal or a rejection or an abandonment of myself in your presence. And so that threatens me to the core of being left alone, which means I could be ultimately left to die, right? And so I will do anything it takes to ultimately get your love. And it's important then that you are okay. And so I will shrink myself and make sure that you go first. And it's about your needs, not my needs, sadly. And so that is the beginning of unhealthy patterns in relationship. And a lot of us get into that. And we become codependent then on the other person.
How do we unravel that? Like, I'm listening and I'm thinking to myself, if this thing started at a tender age in your childhood, how do I untangle all those belief systems that have now allowed me to become this codependent adult?
Yeah, it's actually, I shouldn't say it's a lot easier, but there's certainly a process. There's certainly a journey that one can take. It would require one to be pretty committed, and it really is just about helping your brain positively, emotionally stack itself in and around its association with itself. So in other words, again, turning the eyes inwards and doing a exercise or a program where I am noticing myself and where I am okay, where I'm lovable, where I'm acceptable, and where I do matter and where I'm safe. As an adult now, I have to look in and see where am I those things. And literally, it's like filling up buckets, right, of acceptance for yourself, of love for yourself, and literally pen to paper writing this out and proving it to yourself. Because you would realize by now that no one outside in the world is going to give that to you. This is an inside job. And so what you'll notice is, this is going to sound really crazy and on the verge of narcissistic, but it's a healthy self-regard for someone when they can get above 100 ways they love themselves and truly, authentically acknowledging and seeing what they love. What that does is it creates a sense of security inside oneself. It anchors oneself to the extent then that if somebody does say no or does reject you or does move away from you, you have enough in the reserve bank account around positive association with yourself that it doesn't impact you or collapse you into a crisis or anxiety or a panic of any sorts. And so that's the work is continual self-reflection. And also obviously going back to some of the earlier moments, if one can remember, where some of the earlier rejections did take place, and reframing those and looking at those from a different point of view certainly helps as well. And in narrative therapy, what we're basically doing is we exposing and externalizing the narrative. What narrative or belief are you living through? In other words, I can't be like this. I have to be like this in order to get love. That's a narrative that you've developed, right? And so we challenge those narratives and start to write new narratives that are a lot more aligned with that person's truth. And that's obviously the bit of the therapy work that we do there, but it certainly can shift. The concern, obviously, in a sort of clinical practice is you're also looking at the ability of that person who's with you to be able to self-reflect and to be able to actually pick up on the narratives that they are living through. Sadly, when the trauma is great enough and the abuse has been of such an extent, the sense of self has collapsed so deeply that they are terrified of that ever being exposed again. And so they develop a false self. And that false self now becomes this grandiose or amplified version of themselves that's bigger than, better than, superior than anybody else. And that's where we give birth to narcissism, where we enter this realm of a collapsed sense of self due to massive trauma. And now I've developed a false self to cope and get through and dominate and control life so that I never have to feel that hurt ever again.
Sure.
And yeah, you see where that comes from, right? And so there's narcissism is such a big buzzword these days, but that's how it develops, sadly.
Yeah.
And then of course you can't help those people with such a collapsed sense of self because they will just constantly blame you, or because there's no accountability, right? And there's no empathy, so they won't take any account for their own rescue or being responsible for their own healing because they don't think they're a problem. They think you're the threat, you're the problem. And so it's very difficult for those people to change their beliefs or narratives. But fortunately, the majority of us live on the other side of the spectrum there, where we certainly get into those narratives and start shifting those. But it's about, in your own lived daily experience, proving to yourself that you are okay. And that takes a lot of courage and discipline. But that's why coaching is great, because coaching is there, check in daily. Have you done your list of 10? How about tomorrow? How about next week? Are we on top of that? Have we got to 50 ways? And when you work with someone like that, it really helps somebody break through quite quickly, which is exciting.
Dr. Neaves, I'm going to have to cut our conversation very short. We are time pressed. What we are going to do is perhaps host you for the next couple of weeks, because there's quite a bit that you said there. You talked about narcissism. My brain is almost imploding within itself with all the data that you've just gave us. Right. But I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been fruitful.
Pleasure. Thank you. Be blessed, you guys. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye now.
The voice there of Dr. Nicholas Neaves, who is a homeopath and a narrative therapist with over 25 years in practice.